Hi, Michaela.
Hi, Steve.
Well, we're back for another AMA, Ask Michaela Anything. Thank you to those who've been sending them in. Please keep sending them in to workshops@michaelaboehm.com or indeed via Instagram. So here is today's question. To quote, what is it that you believe humans are most commonly in search of in their sexual explorations, consciously and subconsciously? What's possible? What's healthy? What's not? What are we commonly distracted by in this Instagram-promoted, quasi-medicalized, word salad world? What are we missing?
There's a whole bunch of really great questions in there. And so I think there's two ways we can go at this, and we can talk about both of them. So the one thing, of course, is what can we do so that our sex lives and our erotic lives, because not everybody has a partner, are interesting and exciting and fulfilling. There's that part. And then there is the other part, which is what are we seeing out there and what's being sold as achievable or attainable or aspirational that might not be the best way to go at it. And those are, those of course intersect in a certain way, because we do see a lot more out there nowadays. And a lot of the things, I like the medicalized word salad, a lot of the things that you see out there, particularly on, places like Instagram, is essentially people who have read enough or seen enough that they can put something nice together that makes people feel like if they do this, they will have better sex. And one aspect of that is people who go really into, let's say, the sexual mechanics, touch this, know this. Did you know that, this part of your anatomy goes this way? And, there's that kind of stuff that's presented out there. And then there's also the kind of myth on what a really good sex life looks like. And that particular aspect of, let's say, how is your sex life better, is skill development. But that's only a very small part of what makes sex really actually exciting. And not just sex, kind of the erotic, very exciting. And so within that, there's a whole other domain, right? And when these two get conflated, it gets very difficult. So we can talk about the skill development for a moment, in the sense that, the question is mentioning kind of the medicalized advice. So a lot of the things that are in the skill development domain would be things that would center around having better sexual skills. And that's better sexual skills on oneself, and also better sexual skills on somebody else or with somebody else. And that's definitely worth exploring, because obviously we don't learn about sex in the same kind of organized way we learn about other things, because first of all, that's not appropriate at the time where we learn a lot of things, meaning in our development. And also, it's fraught with all kinds of issues, from shame to inappropriateness to lack of information. So most of us come to the actual sexual skill development at a time where we're learning on the job, so to speak, and potentially from people who are not skilled themselves. So in the quest for a better relational, erotic, sexual life, it's definitely worth learning more about how our own bodies function, what actually works, what doesn't work, technically speaking, where things are in the body and somebody else's body. How do you attend to those things? I think there is a place for that, and there's people out there who do really good work on actual sexual education. There's also a lot of people out there who are parroting other people's work without really having the underpinnings. But you can get good information. There's good books and there's good everything that allows people to understand, how does their body work? How does somebody else's body work? How do you deal with the mechanics of that? And I think that's good to do at any given moment in one's life, both solo, because there's nothing like knowing one's own body and being able to give oneself pleasure and, well-being, because it's not all about the sex. It's, of course, about the vitality and the aliveness and sourcing creativity and pleasure in our own body. That's really, really important. And being able to do that, technically speaking, is great. And then there's, of course, the other aspect, which I'll talk about, which is, I think, more important in a moment. And then, of course, if somebody starts a new relationship and in the first flush of sexual excitement, we often overlook certain skill deficiencies in ourselves and others because it's exciting and there's lots of, spark and chemistry. But even at that point, it's always good to look at where can somebody learn a bit more, and how can you also, if you have a new partner, play around with, kind of getting smooth in the way the bodies interact. And there's a skill component to that. There's also a relational component to that. And then, of course, later in a relationship, when let's say when the first spark is gone, then it gets very important to also learn new skills and stay adventurous within the relationship so that new things can happen together. And that's sometimes fraught with a little bit of trouble, because often people come to that exploration with you're not doing it right. This doesn't feel great anymore. It's never felt great, but I've pretended it feels great. But now that we're together for 5 years or 10 years or 7 years, I have to tell you it doesn't feel great, right? And that's not a good place to come at it. A much better place to come at it is from the viewpoint of, we've gone this far, now let's go on an adventure together and learn some new things and deepen our engagement as a couple willing to be adventurous in that domain, adventurous and adventurous in that domain. So that's skill development when it comes to, let's say, what our questioner calls the medicalized world salad on, social media or things like that. But then there's a whole other realm that I think is even more important. And it's more important because it's the embodiment on a daily basis that makes it possible that we are turned on, that we have pleasure, that we feel excited, that we're ready to engage with ourselves and someone else. And that you can't just hack with some good mechanics. That's something that has to be cultivated throughout day and life and within ourselves and in the relationship, because it's something that needs to be, so to speak, installed in the body as a way of feeling the body and feeling somebody else through the body. So that's the skill development mechanics part, and that's really important. But the thing that I'm much more interested in, and of course that's also where all our work centers, is how do you inhabit your body in a way that allows you to have, let's say, a vital, pleasure-filled life that's kind of turned on, so to speak, not just by sex, but by the engagement with life itself. And then out of that place comes a much deeper engagement with the more sexual and erotic dimension, because, of course, that sexual and erotic dimension gets unfolded in a body, and the body is either open and vital and energized and ready to feel and ready to connect, or the body is shut down, neglected, and there isn't much happening because somebody spends too much time in their head, too much time doing, too much time on their various devices, scrolling through Instagram for sex tips or whatever else, right? So there's something to be said about understanding how to inhabit the body fully in a way that allows us to really avail ourselves of our sexual and erotic and creative energy throughout our lives. And also understanding that the 5 senses which is the sensual engagement or sensual, aliveness, is really the portal and the pathway into the more erotic, pleasure, sexual stuff. And so that's really, really important to know and understand, because you can know all the mechanics. If you have spent most of your day, every day, on your computer, sitting down in your head, thinking about stuff to do, then your body doesn't really actually have pathways readily available at all times, so to speak, to conduct pleasure and vitality and energy and turn on. And we see that a lot in any of our workshops, where people come and say, they're willing, they want to, they are in relationships, or they're starting relationships, but they're just not feeling much. And of course, that's always true when you're not deeply connected with those aspects of your body, which you're not when you're spending all your time in your head. So a good way to look at how can we make our erotic engagement more exciting is to understand some of the, let's say, principles that make that happen holistically or sustainably. And so the first principle is, of course, the principle that we talk about a lot, and also, of course, a lot of my teaching in the Wild Woman's Way and the study groups and everything centers very strongly around understanding energy distribution in the body. And this is true for men and women alike, where essentially we need to understand that our body is extremely energy efficient, and wherever our attention is, our energy goes. And because we have a finite amount of energy in our body will pull from the areas where we don't need it at the moment into the areas where we need it. So typically here, which is why there's a lot of head, neck, jaw, shoulder tension, because the energy pools up there where it's needed. And then whatever most is activated, or whatever patterns are most used, in this case, mostly head, neck, shoulder, thinking, doing, directing patterns, that's where the strongest pathways are. And then down here, where all the pleasure and the creativity and aliveness and sexual engagement lives, there isn't much pathways available, because we are not actively practicing that as much as we practice this. So that's a very quick snapshot of energy distribution. And we can point to some of I have some free lectures and stuff on that as well, where I go into great details. So I don't want to go too deep into that. We can post those links underneath. But that's a big thing to understand. Once we understand energy distribution, we can practice and engage with those parts of the body that can be more alive and more engaged, so we can bring it to our lives and our relationships and our hopefully exciting sexual engagement. So there's that piece. And that's super important, because only when you have proper pathways and proper aliveness channels, so to speak, will you be able to reliably go there fairly quickly. And that's also important, because you don't want to just be able to do that when your partner presses all the right buttons, hopefully. You want to be able to bring that so there's more available to play with. So that's the first thing. The second thing, and this is super, super important, and our questioner is going about, what are we missing when we look at sexual and erotic excitement? Well, one of the things we're often missing is what we like to call flavors in our work. And this year, particularly, I've leaned quite heavily into flavors, because it's one of these overlooked, amazing tools for all kinds of aspects, including the erotic. And originally, when I created the whole body of work around flavors, it was mostly so that in the erotic play, internally as well as with a partner, or in the dating aspect where you're trying to get a partner, you are able to inhabit different aspects of yourself and not just the same old, same old, same old. Because in human beings, flavors are very, very important. We like new, we like different, we like exciting, we like, nobody really wants to have the same, flavor every single day. And that's really important to know. We don't wear the same outfit or eat the same food. Well, some of us do, but most of us like new things and new variety. And that's flavors. And so when we are able to actually embody flavors, meaning different aspects of us, then our erotic life becomes way more interesting and way more fun. And people know that instinctively because, there you hear people talk about role play or pretending they don't know each other or going to some different place or, in nature or on a vacation or whatever. And then their erotic life kind of reinvigorates because different things and new things are exciting in the erotic domain. And the more flavors you have available, the more you can play in those different domains. And this is, by the way, true for men and women alike, because the reason why I always think about that, because we buy it every year for the pure fun of it. We buy the Australian firefighter calendar and put it in the laundry room so everybody at my house gets to have a chuckle about, some beefy fireman with a tiny little, kangaroo or something like that. And why is that exciting? Well, because it's a flavor, different, the cowboy, there's all these kind of different tastes that feel fresh and they feel exciting and they enliven the body. Of course, that goes the other way around too. And particularly the flavors that we are not are very exciting to play with in the erotic, both solo and with a partner, which is why different outfits, different hairstyles, different ways of behaving, wigs, all of those things people do naturally. But that's external. But internally, you can learn how to be, let's say, more cooling energy or very hot and spicy energy, a darker kind of erotic tone or a very light, sublime tone. You can learn these things in the body. They're like postures, like yoga postures, so to speak, flavor postures. And those flavor postures are all parts of us. They're just the parts that are not naturally developed. And within that, there lies an incredible potential for erotic play and sexual play and aliveness and newness and delight, so to speak. So I think that's a really overlooked area that anybody can do, regardless if they're starting out in a relationship or they are 20 years in and it's all ho-hum because it's pizza every day, so to speak. And it's not kinky in the sense that you have to do whips and chains and dungeons and role play and pretend you don't know your partner in some faraway hotel, even though that's also fun perhaps. But it's more that you can at different times load up different energies and really have some excitement again. And that's what most people want. They want a bit of excitement and they want a bit of something that feels, new and fresh and out of the ordinary. And when you rely on external sources for that, you're going to run out of things to do or ideas. And of course, everything you've done before isn't quite as exciting the second time around if it works. And if it doesn't work, then it's, oh, well, that wasn't great. But flavors, there's a million of them. You'll never run out of things you can play with. And that makes it quite useful in relationship. So one of the reasons I'm so excited about flavors, and I really leaned in this year with flavors, is that it really gives you a whole other entry into relationship, but also into the way you can live life. And it started with creating the flavor immersions, of which we will do 2 this year, one in Australia in April and one in October in Portugal. And the flavor immersions were really meant as a way to give women a tool and an entry into something that enlivens the kind of sexual relationship, the erotic engagement, but also the creative, and interestingly enough, also aspects like boundary setting, or engaging with some flavors that are very badass, that bolster us in our lives. So that's how it started. I started creating these immersions, and we did one last year, and we're going to do 2 this year. And then I created the card deck as a means to support the immersion by giving specific flavors to resonate with and vibrate with. And then, of course, I wrote an oracle oracle book with the card practice set, because it felt great. And then I created the flavor families, which is an online 5-part program where online we're also working with how are these different flavor families applicable in life, and in business, and in sex, and in creativity. So there's a whole bunch of really, really dedicated immersions available, because I think it's one of those things that really gives anyone who can go there the kind of the edge in their lives in a very exciting and positive way, and in a way that you can only get through practice. You can understand these things, but you have to work them through the body. And once they work through the body, they become kind of an intuitive way of actually engaging with all different aspects of life. We just have a little bit more available. It's along the lines of what archetypes can do, but it's much more specific to the erotic and relationship and creativity and extra kind of oomph or power. And so that said, that I think is a really, really important thing for any human to engage in, having more capacity, having more variety, and also having the muscle to bring that forth. And then I think the last thing to mention in response to this questioner's thoughts on what's important, why do we want things, what do we want? Well, I think when we really look at it, and this is this is always the conundrum when we work with people, is that we want both. We want the amazing relationship that's safe and secure and loving and connected, but we also want excitement, and we want the sexual spark, and we want it all. And there's nothing wrong with wanting it all. And I think it can be had. And I know people who have it all, but it takes a bit of discipline. And it takes a bit of discipline because it requires that you constantly update your software, so to speak, very much like one has to update the software on, Zoom or something to stay current. That also has to happen in relationship. And we tend to not do that because, of course, the way human beings are built is we kind of relax into a situation and we go along. And we are somewhat complacent in our behavior, but our mind and our desires want the update. And so there's often a huge gap there between what we're actually doing on a day-to-day basis in our relationship with our own erotic body, as well as with someone else, and what we wish we had. And that's, of course, where social media comes in as something that can be very, detrimental and pernicious, because we see things that we want, and there's promises of that being available. And I'm not even going to go there, because of course a lot of that isn't really based in reality, but we have a taste of that and we want that. But what we actually do in a relationship or in our own engagement with ourselves is not actually updating the software regularly, learning new skills, installing new behaviors, patterns, flavors, things of that nature. So there is always an option and a possibility to really update our own place in where we sit in the relationship and where we sit in our own body with ourselves, and not assume that what worked in our 20s works in our 40s or 50s. But that constant updating, both physically, emotionally, in our erotic skills, is super important, which is why something like Flavors is, one way to really do that. The other thing, of course, is that within the update of who we are, we have to also look at what are previous imprints and what have we kind of brought with us from earlier relationships or childhood imprints, parental imprints, the relationships we saw and thought were the relationships that people had versus the kind of relationship we want or we want now. So there's an updating that has to happen occasionally where we, let's say, review our view on things. We also review our purpose of relationship. We've talked about that quite extensively. What is the purpose of a relationship? Are two people still aligned? If you go out and date, what is the purpose of your desired relationship? Who are you? What do you bring into this? Who is the other person? Does that actually match up with your desires? Does it match up with your erotic expectations? Does it match up with your lifestyle? So there's a whole examination that should happen on occasion so that you're current with who you are and how you bring yourself into relationship. And then as we go deeper into our lives, we, of course, accumulate a certain amount of gunk, let's say, meaning imprints and patterns and aspects of how we see ourselves in relationship that have gone by the wayside, either because we've grown and developed, or we are now mature enough that we don't have to replicate the patterns of our childhood, or imprints from previous lovers or relationships that really hinder us in being fully present with our current exploration, whatever that is. So that's also a really, really important piece. And that's often neglected when we only look at the mechanics, that sometimes it needs a good, to stick with the computer analogy, defrag, meaning we have to get rid of things, we have to reprogram stuff, we have to release stuff. And a lot of that has to do with actually getting it out of the body somatically. So it's not enough to just talk about it, and it's not enough to have emotionally processed things. You have to essentially do the talking about it, sorting through the feelings, and then getting it out of the body. And that's kind of another one of those things that I really love for my own personal exploration, as well as in the way we're teaching, because that whole freeing oneself from those imprints is so fundamental. When you do that, body, heart, and mind, so to speak, you can actually be fresh and you can be present, and you are not carrying your own entire history with you. And so to that extent, we've created an entire body of work that's called Love, Lineage, and Liberation, where we look at parental imprints, previous partners' imprints. This year, for the first time, I've talked about this a lot in podcasts, but this year, for the first time, I'm actually teaching it, where we're looking at how to get the imprint of a lover that's very deep out of the body and replace it with a more devotional, expanded, non-specific imprint, so that we're not constantly, fantasizing or through the heart coming back to a partner who's no longer there, who left or is not good for us. And that's super, super important, because when you have that shaped, that previous partner shaped hole, then you're not as likely able to engage deeply, both erotically and relationally, with someone new freshly. So that kind of pulling those old imprints out is also super important. And I've talked about this a lot, and this year I've decided to actually teach it in an organized fashion, because people always ask about that. How do you remove a previous imprint from the body, and how do you actually become current? So that's another thing that we do, of course, and that I think is super important when we look at how to get under it. And I'm sure you'll link to that, but we're doing a love lineage liberation in Portugal in March, and we're doing one in April in Australia this year. Because I think when that's handled, then everything else is fresh, and then you can come to whatever form relationship you want to engage with a clean slate and with the experience, but not the baggage. And that, of course, is super exciting in all kinds of domains.
Very interesting, Michaela. Thank you. And next time, we are going to deal with this question, an AMA question. I'm going to tease it here in advance of our next episode. I am looking for a partner. How can I be more attractive to men? What should I prioritize? Radiance? Attitude? Physical appearance? So that's next episode's question. Michaela, thank you very much.
Thanks, Steve.